Well, obviously, you can see where this is going. About a month or two later, I was making homemade ice cream, and I thought, well, what if I could freeze this faster? What if I could use liquid nitrogen to do that? And
Right.
so that led me into kind of my discovery of Dippin Dots, and took me down a whole different path at that point.
Yeah, when I was looking up, try to find out a little bit more about you, it says that you created a music publishing company in Nashville. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
called MLS Entertainment.
MLS Entertainment. Is that like another passion project? Why'd you start that?
Actually, what I really wanted to do back in the mid 2000s or early 2000s was I wanted to start a screenwriting company.
Okay.
And I ended up, was going to just rent an office, but I found a building that was a pretty good buy on Music Row. And the company there was a publishing company that owned the building, and the husband and wife were actually going through a divorce. And so they needed to sell the property, but they still wanted to rent the space. So it gave me like a floor, and I rented the rest of the building to them. But anyway, after about 6 or 8 months, they kind of pulled me into their realm, their space, and I invested in their publishing company. And then about a year or two later, started my own publishing company. And then
Right.
we ended up running that for a couple of years, and then we ended up doing some joint ventures with like bigger companies in Nashville. Like, we had a deal with BMG, and we had a deal with SB21. But there was one big name we had that was pretty big that we had some writers with. So
I'm assuming it's mostly country music, being in Nashville.
yeah, right now it's mostly country music. I would like to get into other forms at some point. And
Like what?
well, I don't know, just maybe not be limited just to country, I guess.
Right. Okay. Just diversify a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, we've had 3 #1 hits in our catalog, and we've had
Really?
probably over 20 or 25 album cuts. I'd have to go back and kind of look at all.
So how do you transition from 40 Below Joe, which is basically what I would assume you spend most of your time on, to back to that and keep everything on track?
Well, unfortunately, when I started the publishing company, I had kind of not pulled away from Dippin Dots, but I had it at a good place to where I had some people running it, kind of managers, and then I would just, kind of like I do here, I'd come up for a few days a week and work on things. But then I got kind of pulled back into Dippin Dots a lot more with different projects, and so I ended up hiring a manager of the company who was he kind of knew the music publishing business, and I kind of let him kind of manage the company, so I wasn't as involved in it in a day-to-day. And then we started doing joint ventures, which kind of reduced our risk and our upfront investment of, like, instead of paying the writers' draws, the companies would pay them, and we took a smaller percentage, for
Right.
managing and all that. So anyway, it kind of became one of those deals where I was able to keep the company alive and going, but it wasn't like when I first started, where we were down there when the writers were coming in and writing songs, and we were recording demos and all that kind of stuff. So,
Right.
but I think if I ever started back up again, when I get caught up a little bit, once 40 Below Joe is launched and running real good, I'm thinking about maybe kind of giving it another shot to get back into, getting some more writers and things like that. And
Right.
I want to be open to not just doing country music. So there's a lot of pop music in Nashville, a lot of other types of music too.
Yeah, they're spreading out quite a bit. So just to start out with, could you lay some context down to anybody that might listen to this in the future, like who you are, the Dippin Dots story, how you got started, and kind of translate it into what you're working on now, I guess?
Yeah, and first of all, am I okay with where I'm at, the background? You want me to move?
Yeah, that's fine. It doesn't matter to me.
I wasn't sure if the light in the back was bothering you or anything like that. But
No, it's all good.
yeah, so Well, my name's Curt Jones. I grew up about 45, 50 miles south of Carbondale, and went to Century High School. I went to a local junior college called Shawnee College. And then I came to SIU and got my bachelor's degree in microbiology and my master's degree. And I guess the way that kind of started was I took an introductory micro class when I was a junior in college, and I really liked it a lot. And it kind of showed me kind of growing up on a farm and around agriculture, it kind of tied a lot of things together, like, I knew soybeans put nitrogen back in the ground, but I didn't really know how the bacteria lived on the roots. And, you learn things like, the sugar that makes the starch in corn comes from the CO2 in the air and the sunlight through photos, so all these little things,
Really, I did not know that.
Oh, well, yeah. So, so the carbon in sugars actually come from the CO2 in the air, and the energy for that comes from photosynthesis, which is powered by the sun and uses pigments, called chlorophyll, and that's what makes a plant green. So all these little things were really nice to kind of study and learn. And so I got my bachelor's degree in microbiology. I always liked the industrial side more than the medical side.
Okay.
And then I decided when I got my undergraduate degree that I would go ahead and go for my master's, because I didn't really go out and apply for any jobs. I was planning on just maybe doing some farming and things like that. I got married about the same time that I graduated. And so I was able to get a lot of my classes for my master's degree out of the way. And then my wife and I got pregnant, and I decided I need to get a job. So I was able to get a full-time job at a local prison while I worked on my master's degree. And I'm leading up to all this and kind of where it takes me. But what happened is that I still had to do the research part of my thesis. And I chose the topic of producing lysine by bacterial fermentation. Well, what is lysine? Lysine is one of the 20 amino acids that are the building blocks of protein. And we grew pigs on the farm along with grain and everything. And we would always add soybean meal to our corn to get the protein. And you added different amounts of soybean meal depending on how much protein you wanted. But I found there was a guy came by, a salesman one time. He said, if you'll put 3 pounds of this white powder in your feed, you can save 100 pounds of soybean meal, which was the most expensive part of the thing. I said, well, what is it? He said, well, it's actually lysine. It's one of the most limiting amino acids in the corn diet for pigs. And he said, it's all made in Japan through bacteria. Well, I was already into microbiology, and I started looking into that. And I thought, wow, all this is being made in Japan by bacterial fermentation. I'm studying microbiology. I need a master's thesis. And so I asked my professors if I could do it on that. And over a 3-year period, I developed an organism that was doing about 75% of the production level that they were doing in Japan. And I thought, well, that's getting very close, because I could put a plant here. I wouldn't have to ship it across the ocean. That was kind of going to be my first real business venture, on a large scale. Well, the year I graduated with my master's, by the way, I mentioned the prison because what we were doing there, I actually worked for a junior college, Southeastern Illinois College, and they had vocational classes on the prison. But we had an ethanol plant there. And my job was actually, I was the alcohol fuels instructor. So I was teaching the inmates how to make ethanol from corn.
Okay.
We had all these research projects, feeding cattle the byproducts of the, of the high protein distillers grains that were left over and all that. But anyway, the main thing is it gave me access to a laboratory that hadn't been used in years. And I was able to do all my master's research, or a lot of it there, while working at the prison and after hours and things like that. So anyway, I got my thesis. Then there was an announcement made the same year that a Japanese company was putting a lysine plant in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, which is only 50 or 60 miles from here.
Right.
And I thought, well, I could look at that 2 ways. I could actually go apply for a job because I have experience with it. but I was really disappointed that I couldn't have my own business. I guess I had that entrepreneurial bug. And so instead of going that route, I went to work for a company down in Lexington, Kentucky called Alltech. And they had been in the ethanol business. I mean, providing enzymes and yeast and things like that for the ethanol industry, both on the drinking side and on the fuel ethanol side. But anyway, I went to work for them, and they were just getting into the animal feed business. And my job was to make lactobacillus bacteria to put back into their feed products. And it's now referred to as probiotics, because, good bacteria outnumber bad bacteria. And you don't have to.
I take some for my gut every day, which is
exactly
right. Okay.
So that was back in the mid 80s. And my job was to actually grow the lactobacillus bacteria in pure cultures and fermenters. And I've already made this a long story, but long story short, part of the process is that you have to freeze dry it into a powder once it's frozen, once the cultures are frozen, because you want a powder to mix into all the feed products. Well, I started playing with a different way of freezing. I started playing with liquid nitrogen because I wanted a very small ice crystal to form. A large ice crystal will actually puncture the cell, and so it won't survive the process of freezing and freeze drying. Well, obviously, you can see where this is going. About a month or two later, I was making homemade ice cream, and I thought, well, what if I could freeze this faster? What if I could use liquid nitrogen to do that? And so that led me into kind of my discovery of Dippin Dots, and took me down a whole different path at that point.
Right. Okay. So that's pretty incredible. You're just playing around with liquid nitrogen. Are you playing around with liquid nitrogen in the lab in the prison?
No, this was before that. I mean, this came after I left my job. I think I left my job in the prison when I got my master's degree in 1986. I actually went to work for Alltech.
Okay.
And then it was there, after being there about 8 months to a year, that I started playing around with liquid nitrogen to make because we were growing very fast. And not only did I have to grow the cultures, I had to freeze them. And we were freezing them in thin sheets using dry ice and acetone and floating like metal trays. But I knew that I had to find a faster way to do that and a better way. And so I started playing with liquid nitrogen. And I played with it a couple ways. I'd pour the cultures in the nitrogen. It'd make a big chunk, and I'd do it the other way. And then I finally found that if you dribbled it in, it would make pellets.
Oh, okay. So you just kind of dropped it in single
Right.
bicycle. Okay. So you're making homemade ice cream one day, and does the thought just come across as what happens if I just run this through some liquid nitrogen?
Sort of. I actually, I'm trying to remember if I had the thought while I was making ice cream, but I think
I'm just thinking, was it like a real spontaneous kind of impulsive move, or?
Yeah, I know that I was thinking about it for about 2 or 3 weeks before I actually made any.
Right.
And I think I got the idea when I was making homemade ice cream. I got the idea of being able to, or if I could do that process I've kind of developed for the other thing. And then I thought about it until the next time I made homemade ice cream, and I saved about a pint of it and got some liquid nitrogen and made some beads that way.
So you talk about your background in microbiology, but you also speak on the wanting to have a business someday and kind of that entrepreneurial mindset. Were you always kind of driven towards microbiology? Did you think you would stay in that field, or where did the wanting to have a business kind of come from?
Well,
because you didn't go to school for business, so I'm just wondering how that kind of unfolded. Yeah.
No, I think that was already in me, because I think growing up on a farm, I had some small businesses, related to farm or agriculture. Like I had a hay hauling business, and me and a friend used to sell straw bales to contractors along the highways, when they seed and cover the land with straw. And I had me and another friend had a kind of a radio repair business, because my dad used to work on the old tube type radios and TVs. Okay. So I was always somewhat entrepreneurial and always trying to figure out a way to maybe kind of be in business for myself. Now, when I got my degree in microbiology, before that, I thought I would probably just end up farming,
Okay.
But at the same time, I guess when I did get my degree and I got my second job, which would have been all tech. After being there for a few months, I kind of thought that's probably what I would do, is something like I would just have a salary job.
Right.
But then when I had the idea for the ice cream, I took it to my boss, who was also very entrepreneurial and very supportive of me too over the years. Once I decided to leave, but I actually took it to him originally and said, is this something you think you'd be interested in working with? And I think what it was, he was so early in the company and what he was doing that he didn't see it fitting into what they were doing. But
right.
When I did decide to leave a few months later, he was very understanding and threw me a party and bought me a briefcase and everything. So,
very nice. Yeah. So kind of, you're at this point now where you're obviously a very creative person, and I guess you love playing around with liquid nitrogen at this point. That's fairly obvious. But do you find times when you kind of have to balance the creative and invention side of you and then kind of focus a little bit more on things that are more analytical, like business? And where are you referencing business material from? Do you have books? Do you have different resources that you kind of refer to about business?
I think my business acumen, if you will, comes probably again from growing up on the farm, just learning.
Right, experience.
Yeah, I mean, there's a risk every time you put seeds in the ground. You want to do everything you can to make them grow, but you have to watch how much you spend. You can only spend so much on fertilizer and fuel, and otherwise you're going to sell it for less than you're making. And it's a pretty tight margin on a farm. And then I think when I went to work for Alltech, I was at the very early stages of a company. It was probably, I think I was there for its first $1 million month.
Yeah.
But it ended up being like a $3 or $4 billion company, several years later. So, but the founder of that company, I think I learned a lot from him in the year and a half or so that I worked there, because he really showed me in a way that, you could take an idea and turn it into a sellable product, basically a product or a service. And I think when I saw that, it kind of gave me the confidence that I could do the same thing someday. And then I had the idea that kind of, hit me, I guess.
Right. So let's say anybody out there that has a business idea and don't necessarily know where to start and how to implement it, what advice would you give to them on starting? Well,
I think nowadays there's such good services, just like where I'm at today. I'm at the, basically the Small Business Development Center. And
right.
I think there's a lot of,
it's amazing here. Yeah.
So I think that's a good start. You can come in and talk to people, and you can do a lot of research nowadays online, and you can kind of do a lot of things that probably wasn't available to me back then. But I always tell people when they start talking about wanting to start a business, I always say, well, first of all, you have to have a really good product or a really good service. I mean, and it has to be something that you really convince yourself that you can sell. You have to believe in it yourself. And because a lot of times I'll get an idea in the middle of the night and I'll write it down or I'll put it in my phone. And I always want to look at it the next couple of days and really, usually I talk myself out and say that wasn't that great of an idea.
Right. Yeah.
It seems really good at 1 o'clock in the morning, but it's not, it probably wouldn't work. But sometimes though, the ideas won't go away. You're like, I think that could work, or I think that needs to be done. And
how often are you coming up with these ideas?
Oh, too often. I mean, I'm always
Yeah.
thinking about things. And
yeah, I have a little journal that I write down ideas, but I mean, out of, let's say if I write down 10 a day, the chances of one out of the next 10 days, like maybe 1 out of 100 might be something that I would think about going into. So
yeah, no, I agree. And we were talking about songwriting earlier. That it's always interesting when you talk to a really successful songwriter. They'll tell you that what they'll usually tell you is, I had to write about 200 songs before I got one that was even worth doing a demo on.
Okay.
And then
so
you get better at it as they go.
Do you have a particular failure in mind that's kind of led to future success that you liked?
Oh, well, I don't know. I mean, I will say that in one of my early entrepreneurial activities was probably when I was about maybe a ninth grader in high school, like a freshman in high school.
Yeah.
Me and a friend of mine were going to get into the chicken business. We both had farms about 6 or 7 miles away from each other. And he agreed that he was going to buy 100 chickens and I was going to buy 100 chickens. And together we were going to help each other, build fences and do all the things. And we were going to kind of go into the egg business. And then it's funny, we bought these chickens and they were real easy to raise the first few weeks because they're so small and you just put out a little bit of water and a little bit of feed and keep them warm. And but I remember I told you my dad worked on old tube type radios. Well, I had a radio in my room in Southern Illinois, and it would pick up a signal from Nashville from a station called WLAC. And they had an advertisement on there that you could buy little baby chicks. You could buy 100 chicks for $3. And we had paid like $12 or $13 or $14. I don't remember what we paid for our 100 chicks. And I thought, wow, that's a great deal. So I went to my friend the next day at school and I said, how much money do you have? And he said, oh, I got like, 10 or $12. And I said, well, I got the same. And so we ended up ordering 800 chickens. And,
800 chickens?
800 chickens. Plus,
wait, did you have you had 200 at that point?
Right, so,
and you just made the impulsive decision to quadruple the number?
Exactly. And,
okay.
Just because we could get a good price on them,
Right.
And, obviously, that wasn't very smart because, there's a lot of other expenses in business and all
right.
that. But anyway, that was kind of an early lesson.
Yeah,
we had too many eggs and, we couldn't sell them all. And
I mean, two ninth graders looking after 800 chicks I feel it's a bit excessive.
Yeah, well, luckily or unluckily, however you want to say it, the chickens actually, most of them didn't make it. They actually mailed these chicks through the mail, and only about 200 of them got there alive. So that was kind of sad on the one level, but on the other hand, it gave us 400 total, which was way more than we could take care of. So I don't know what we would have done with 800 chickens.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. That leads me into something else. You've always, these ideas that you're coming up with and going from Dippin Dots to 40 Below Joe, it seems like you have a knack for creating these products that kind of scratch your own itch. Has it always been that way? And how would you recommend to other people looking to scratch their own itch and find problems in their life that they can implement into an entrepreneurial venture?
Oh, I mean, definitely. As you know, what's the old saying? Necessity is the mother of invention. So a lot of inventions are things that are solving a problem. I don't know. I was interviewed by Guy Raz on how I built this an NPR podcast.
Great podcast.
Yeah, and he kind of made the statement in the opening statement of the interview. He said, I don't know that you could really say there was a problem with ice cream.
Right.
No. So I think in that case, I just had this kind of idea of approaching something from a different direction. And even though most people see Dippin Dots as a novelty that's fun to eat, I still look at it as scientifically one of the best ways you can freeze ice cream. Because in ice cream that you would make in a normal, freezer or whatever, you really want to make the ice crystals as small as you can. And you're still going to get a slow freeze when you use ice and salt. So you want to disperse those ice crystals with either air or butterfat.
Right.
And in my mind, by freezing the ice crystal 40 to 50 times smaller than what you would normally do, you're actually solving that problem where you don't have to have air and you don't have to have extraordinarily high amounts of butterfat. So like I said, I look at things kind of maybe from a different angle sometimes. Obviously, the novelty of Dippin Dots is what made it sell.
Right.
But I always say it's the quality that made people buy it more than once.
Wait, did it always sell quite well, even from the start?
Oh, not in the very beginning. I mean, it did if you could get somebody to taste it. But,
right.
Believe it or not, back then it was hard to even get people put in their mouths because they're like, oh, this came out of a lab, or this can't be.
Right. Yeah. And I asked that because you do so many events, like you're bringing the coolers to so many events and just doing free testing that way. And that's, you're huge on that.
Yeah. And I'm a big believer in that. And I did learn that through the Dippin Dot process. I mean, we had to do that for the first 5 years or so. We take Dippin Dots everywhere we went on dry ice and give people samples. And, eventually it kind of catches on and people tell other people about it. And so you've seen us go through that process with 40 Below Joe as well. And now it's starting to catch on.
So you talk about your love for homemade ice cream on a farm, and my dad grew up on a farm, and he always talks about making ice cream as a kid from goat's milk. I think he made it from goat's milk. I might be making stuff up, but did you have the same love for coffee and moving into this venture as you did for ice cream growing up?
No, not really.
No?
I'm more of a tea drinker.
Really?
Myself.
Okay.
Probably iced tea from growing up on the farm.
Right. Okay.
But my wife, Kay, has always been, she loves the coffee, and she's always, and she likes she's not a black coffee drinker, but she likes to have a little sweetness to it or a little bit of cream
Right.
or whatever.
I'm black all the way through and through.
A lot of people are.
Yeah.
But I think really what got me into the coffee business was we were going to put coffee in some Dippin' Dot stores several years ago.
Oh.
And so I started studying the coffee. I knew it was a big thing because, believe it or not, we were at some early trade shows when Starbucks was still pretty, not well known the way they are now. But I could just see the popularity and, what was going on. But I thought, well, I'd like to learn more about coffee. And so when I would talk to a barista at a coffee shop or something, they would say, well, you want to pull your shot of espresso, which is, you get your beans and they're roasted to a certain level and you grind them and then you run them through your espresso process, which is basically hot water under pressure, and you pull a shot of espresso. And when you do that, you want to then use it right away because it starts changing. And I said, well, what makes it change? And they said, well, eventually I found out it's basically the oxygen in the air, which changes a lot of things. And so
really? And so this process actually takes that oxygen out as well,
yeah,
right?
because the barista will tell you that you want to use this stuff. Some of them will say within 30 seconds. Well, I think that's going overboard a little bit. But if you leave coffee out for an hour or so, it does change and it doesn't taste as fresh.
Right.
So I got to thinking about that, and I thought, well, what if I took that fresh shot of espresso and I froze it at 320 below zero with nitrogen, which also displaces oxygen. And I found that you could bring it back to life an hour later, and it made no difference. A day later,
yeah.
And actually, we tested some for over a year, and you couldn't tell a difference in it. So you could actually make really nice frappuccinos or frappes or lattes or cappuccinos with a product that's been in the 40 below freezer for a year. So when I was able to do that, I knew that we had something, because now we could put a lot of energy into getting high quality coffee, and really a variety of coffees, several origins, and we could make it all under ideal conditions. And then by freezing it at 320 below, keeping it at 40 below, we could pretty much get it out to the consumer where all they had to do was warm it up.
Right.
Or as we market it now, as you know, you can also just eat it. We had, dairy-free flavored beets to, make an edible product out of it.
So you're actually making the espresso first before you're freezing it?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Huh. Interesting.
And speaking of the oxygen, we don't use pumps to pressurize our espresso process. I actually use pressure from the nitrogen tank.
Really?
The hot water through the coffee. So again, we're starting with oxygen-free environment right from the very beginning. And then by freezing it with liquid nitrogen, we're keeping the oxygen out of it all the way through.
And there's also a big selling point about it being coconut milk and almond milk and kind of vegan friendly. Was that by design for like kind of a marketing aspect, or was it just because it tasted better?
It was a couple of things. Like I said, my wife enjoyed going to a coffee shop and getting a cappuccino or a latte or, a macchiato. And I think when they started offering, like almond milk and coconut milks, she really liked that because, as a lot of people like going to dairy free, or, it could be a lot of different reasons, but that was part of it. I knew she liked using like almond milk and coconut milk.
Yeah, I don't drink milk anymore. I used to pound it back when I was younger, but if I had my choice, I would go almond milk. So I just thought that was neat, and that going that route would seem like the logical option.
Yeah, and I'm glad we did, because there really is, we really are starting to get a following from that. I mean,
Right.
there are a lot of people really looking for dairy-free and vegan, and
Yeah. Yeah, it's a growing community. I think that just kind of opens up doors to a lot more people.
yeah.
So
Actually, here in Carbondale, um, I actually want to start experimenting with oat milk, because
you want to start experimenting with what?
with oat milk.
Oat milk?
Oat milk. Yeah.
Okay.
You can buy oat milk now, but the reason I want to start playing with that a little bit is because, right now I can't really grow almonds in Southern Illinois, and I can't grow coconuts in Southern Illinois, but I can grow oats.
Right.
So I'm
Okay.
thinking that somewhere down the road, we might want to make our own.
That's a good point. That's a pretty good idea. So do you have any ideas after that you're thinking about working on? You don't have to share if you don't want to.
Oh no, we always have products in the pipeline. One
Right.
product we're working on right now, and it's a product I've had for a long time, but I haven't really launched it. It's a brand called Island Rocks, which is actually a margarita bead. So
With alcohol in it.
you can do it both ways.
Okay.
You can do it without alcohol and use it as a mixer and add your own. But we can also add like the alcohol to it, as long as you keep it in a 40 below freezer, and you don't get the alcohol percentage above about 6 to 8% by weight, then it will hold at 40 below zero into a bead still.
Right.
So that's one product. And then another product that we're working on that's really kind of interesting. There's actually a cottage cheese plant here in Carbondale.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's on the north side of town, and it was here when I was going to college. In fact, I used to go get. Well, let me back up a minute. When you make cottage cheese or yogurt, you basically are inoculating milk. In cottage cheese, it's actually skim milk. You're inoculating with bacterial cultures, just like I used to grow. Only it's a different species, but basically the bacteria grow overnight and they create acid, and then it coagulates and you get the cheese or the yogurt or whatever you're looking for.
Right.
I don't want to say too much about yogurt, but I'm talking more about cottage cheese at the moment. But anyway, when you do that, you basically are getting the cottage cheese off the cell, and you basically don't really have anything to do with the whey. Now you can make protein powder and things like that out of it, but here in Carbondale they're not really doing that. So I actually used to get it back when I was in college, when I was working on a different project where I was making methane gas from waste products and things like that. But anyway, my point is that I got to thinking about that really after my Guy Raz interview, because he actually told me that when we were done with the interview, he said, I make my own yogurt. And he said, I actually keep the whey and I put it in my refrigerator and I drink it when I go to the gym because it's got a lot of protein and minerals and vitamins. And I thought, well, that's a good idea. And I got to thinking about that. I thought, man, I know where there's a lot of whey at, and I don't think it's being used for anything right now. And so we've been experimenting with taking this whey, which is, again, it's got protein, minerals, vitamins, and we made a really nice fruit product out of it. So it's got natural fruit and the whey. And so we're working on a brand for that as well that should be launched sometime next year, which is kind of cool.
So why actually create a new brand and image? Why not just do like a line extension of the existing company?
Well, it's funny. You kind of caught us right when we're talking about a lot of this. We actually want to create a whole umbrella of 40 Below products. So there's 40 Below Joe right now, which is coffee, but in the future, there could be 40 Below Yo, which is yogurt. There could be 40 Below Pro, which is a protein product that you could use in smoothies. There's a 40 Below Hydro, a 40 Below Electro for electrolytes. I mean, there's all kind of products that we can bring under our 40 Below umbrella and make neat products out of them.
Right.
But so because we've started down the dairy-free line with the 40 Below Joe, I think we're trying to decide now, do we want to have all of our products be dairy-free, or do we just want to have each brand be what it is? So like if we wanted to do a 40 below way to go, for example, or something with whey.
I can see you've thought about this quite extensively.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we're kind of in
Okay.
that process of trying to decide.
Yeah.
But the good news is, and I don't want to speak too soon on anything, but we are talking to Prairie Farms about possibly making a product for them, because they could bring that into their frozen distribution system and have a new product and basically utilize a byproduct that they're not using right now. So we're talking about provide, or maybe making a brand that fits their branding, and maybe work together on a project like that.
Yeah, I can't really speak to that other than I know the kind of vegan and non-animal product industry is growing quite extensively. Whether or not it's going to be that way 5 years from now, I have no idea, so I can't speak on that. However, I do like the idea of the margarita, because I feel like there's this perfect timing where the people that are frequenting bars most often were kids back in the day when Dippin Dots was around and going to amusement parks. And so I think the nostalgia would be a great selling point if you were in a bar and you had those.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you're right. So that's a product that's pretty high up on our list of things to launch.
I would be excited to see that in a bar setting for sure. So what I'm going to kind of take it a different direction. Which fascinates me about you is that you have your kind of lane, and you're able to hire and have managers that are possibly better at stuff than you are and that are good fits for your team. What do you look for most when you go into hiring someone for a position? What qualities, characteristics, attributes?
For me, it's really, I don't get too hung up on what your qualifications are, your your edge. I mean, it's always nice if you're hiring someone for accounting that they've got an accounting degree or whatever. But I think a lot of times I really look at kind of if the person believes in what you're doing.
Yeah.
And if they're excited about what you're doing, because I think if you have that element, then they can fit into almost any environment.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, if you've got to work for a living, you'd rather work someplace where, you enjoy what you're doing, or you feel like you're a part of something. And that's kind of what I look for. I think it's kind of like, you can tell some people come to work because they need to make a little money while they're going to school or whatever.
They need a paycheck. Yeah.
Yeah. But then sometimes you get someone that really gets it. They really see what you're trying to do and what you're trying to build. And you can tell they want to be a part of something. And I have employees that have, I had to make a living growing up too. So I don't have a problem with that. It's just that, there are certain people that's going to kind of stick with you for a while and want to be a part of what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. That passion, that's kind of an emotional response. The other stuff can be learned. I would assume that's something that you kind of have to have that's inherent. What would you say is a common practice in business that you try to stay away from, or that you think is more or less BS around?
I don't like to see, I never like to see people manage other people by scare tactics. I never was a fan of that. So
yeah,
I like for people that if they're managing a group, or whatever it might be, a group of people that are loading a truck or working in a production room or something like that, I like the ones that will get in there and work with them. And then if someone does something wrong, it becomes more of a teaching experience. Like, next time don't turn that valve that way, because, it might build the pressure over here, and, this could happen. And, but I also like, I'm not a guy that tries to find the blame in things. I mean, if something goes wrong, I'm more about, let's see how we can fix it and what can we learn from it, So that's, I hope a lot of businesses are like that, or most businesses are like that, but I know that sometimes it can be, there's really hard charging managers, like,
I feel like
you're out the door,
Yeah, I feel like it's definitely coming more in to that sort of lane. I don't think business has always been that way.
Yeah. I don't think anybody should work under an environment where if they feel like they make one mistake, they're out the door, you know. And
Yeah, I mean, that's just crushing,
yeah.
suffocating. Do you have any books that you like that you'd recommend to anybody going into entrepreneurial endeavors that you would recommend?
You know, I probably am not the best source for that. What I like to read is actually like books about physics and things like that. I
Right.
like to kind of, I love reading stories about like the physicists that, you know, worked back in the 1900s and 20s. I like to read about people that started businesses and things like that. So if I'm going to read anything related to a business, it's really about the stories of how they got to where they got to and all the things they had to go through to get there and
Right.
all the things that were against them. Because the reason I like reading about physics a lot is because I love the fact that these guys are making these great discoveries under the most intense, like world wars and things like that, you know. And but what that teaches me is that there's always something you can do, no matter what you're dealt. If it's COVID or anything else, there's always something you can work on, you know, to try to get to the next level. So I like reading things like that more than, you know, here's the 7 habits. I mean, nothing wrong with those books. I'm just saying
Right.
I don't spend a lot of time reading them. It's more about just learning about how things work and what people go through. Because really, business at the end of the day is a lot like sports. I've said that before. It's really when you get knocked down, it's how you get up.
Yeah.
And you're going to get knocked down if you play football or anything else, you know. And it's the same thing in business. It's really about how much resolve you have to just keep going forward. So I think if I ever read books, it's more about motivational stories like that.
Do you have a particular favorite in mind?
Oh gosh, I don't know that I can think of one offhand because I like, and I'm the kind of guy that I read 7 or 8 books. I never finish one, so I'm going
Yeah.
back and
No,
forth.
I do that as well.
Um, but I love to read, you know, about Einstein. I love to read about Edison. You know, Edison was not that much of a science guy. He was just a hard worker that tried things from a lot of different angles. And I liked reading about him. I know he's got some negative press too with, you know, his fights with Tesla and all that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I loved his just never giving up and approaching things from different ways. I mean, he recorded sound the first time he tried it. I mean, I thought that was
Really?
pretty awesome. Yeah. And if you
Wow.
read that story, you know, the light bulb, you know, he talks about doing 10,000 experiments and he didn't invent the light bulb, you know, he improved the light bulb. But when he had the idea to record sound, it was from something that had happened. And he heard a whirring noise. He didn't have very good hearing, but when he heard the different pitches, I think a motor had stuck or something. He thought, wow, I wonder, you know, he got thinking about it. He drew it out that night. His machinist built it and it actually recorded Mary Had a Little Lamb the next day, you know. So he had a lot of insight and I think the ability to approach things from, you know, different angles. And so I enjoyed reading about him, Einstein, a lot of the other physicists. I can't think of any favorite books that I have. Um, at this time anyway. I probably will think of some once I'm
Oh, good.
not talking anymore.
I'm gonna end with this question, and this is something that I ask every guest that I do a kind of interview / discussion with, and that's what advice would you give to a young college student about to graduate and enter the quote unquote real world for the first time, and more or less what advice would you stay away from?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is probably just to encourage them to not get discouraged if they apply for a job and they don't get it the first time, or if they take a job and they don't really like it and you know they want to go to another job at some point. I don't think there's anything wrong with that as long as you leave in the right way or whatever. But I think to anyone that's actually thinking about owning their own business, it's what I said earlier. I mean, think pretty hard about that because business is hard. I mean, there's a lot of things that can make you fail. So you really have to know that you've got a great product or service, I think, before you enter that world. And it doesn't hurt to work for somebody else at first. and maybe learn a few things that way too. But I know, it's exciting to graduate from college, but at the same time, it can be tough because if you can't get a job right away or something, it really it can affect you a little bit. And I think you just have to look at that and say, it's okay. I'm going to find something. You just got to keep a positive attitude about it.
Right, especially with the job market being the way it is right now with COVID.
Right.
Do you have any advice out there that people are giving that you would stay away from?
Well, I think I can't think of anything specific, but I think if someone's advising you, I think we all have these gut feelings, if you will. And I think a lot of times you got to follow your gut. I think you got to kind of say, well, I'm listening, but I'm not really agreeing. You don't say that out loud, but you're,
Yeah, you just nod and
yeah,
do whatever you're going to do.
I think you'll get to know people as you meet more people that when they say something, you kind of listen. You're like, I think that person knows what they're talking about. That's good advice. So.
Awesome. Well, this is all I have, and you've been great. Thank you so much for coming on and doing this. I'm glad we finally got to sit down and have a talk.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll keep in touch and we'll talk soon as well.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Thanks, Curt. Bye.